Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so excited to have everybody. My name is Priya Shah, and I'm the founder and executive director of The Simple Good. So the mission of The Simple Good is to connect the meaning of good from around the world to empower youth to become positive activists through art and discussion. Our core values are diversity and inclusion, which makes us very passionate about the practice of empathy and representation in every community we're a part of. Therefore, I'm really proud to facilitate this critical conversation on closing the gap on minority representation on nonprofit boards with my amazing colleagues and friends and fellow nonprofits who are all joining us here tonight. We had an overwhelming response with tonight's event, which caused us to sell out, open up more spots, and almost sell out again. So I really appreciate the enthusiasm that all of you guys have to be a part of this dialogue. To get started, we do have a big group here with us tonight. So not only from Chicago, but also across the country. So I encourage all of you guys to drop in a hello in the chat box with your location, where you're from, and what does the simple good mean to you? That's something that we start every conversation with, and sharing these small moments of joy that really connect all of us. So I encourage you guys to drop that in the chat as we go through our conversations today. So as you guys do that, I just wanted to give a little overview of why we're here, why we're here, what we're doing, and what we have ahead, and then dive right into the conversations because we have so much to talk about. So me, myself, I actually am from the nonprofit sector and actually from the corporate sector, and have been involved with a lot of different D&I initiatives throughout. One thing that stood out about my participation in these initiatives in corporate was how there was a lack of representation in the D&I staff and CSR staff that implemented a lot of these initiatives in our communities. Many times I was the only brown person in the room that truly understood the realities and the experiences of how unknown and how uneasy it is to come into this space. And many times we are the first ones to come in, we are the first ones in our families to be in these spaces. I founded The Simple Good 9 years ago as I held my corporate job, partially because I saw how CSR groups at the companies I worked at were not actually addressing community issues that they were marketing themselves to do. When I took that leap of faith to enter the nonprofit sector full-time, I unfortunately found the same reality of seeing this lack of representation in the nonprofit sector as well. So today we finally have an opportunity to discuss just that. We'll be hearing from my fellow executive directors, board members of color, and nonprofits that of all different sizes and age ranges to speak on why they believe representation impacts their mission and how we can start discussing solutions. So our vision for tonight and moving forward into the future is a truly diverse and inclusive nonprofit sector that reflects the realities of the people we serve, starting with leadership with their board of directors. So next slide. We will kind of to look at our current landscape. Right now, nationally, 90% of nonprofits have CEOs that are white-led organizations, and 84% of board members are also non-POC. And 61% of board of directors know they don't adequately represent the communities that they serve. When organizations don't have representation, they don't always have cultural competency for the people that they serve, which can lead to for communities to be stigmatized, allow tokenism, and allow for blind spots in creating oppressive initiatives. Next slide. So why is there such a gap? Well, there's going to be a lot of different understandings of why there's a gap, but we're going to focus on a couple today. And one is that people of color don't always know that board opportunities or positions are applicable to them, or that it's even an opportunity for them. And so today we hope to provide some education on how everybody can be a board member, what it means to be a board member, and how to intentionally be involved in the community and the importance of your representation. The second piece is that a lot of times when corporations partner with nonprofits, CSR groups are selecting board members for their organizations, taking away the opportunity for a nonprofit CEO to diversify their board and determine their board makeup. And many times the candidates they select are white men. So why is this a problem? Next slide. It's a problem because a lack of diversity really results in inequity. Boards play a really critical role in helping organizations understand the context in which we work and how we prioritize resources and strategies to make things a reality. Having a diverse board is really critical to counteract systematic inequities built from biases and discrimination in society. An awareness of how our systematic inequities are really important in order to understand how to affect our society and our communities, in order to avoid blind spots that can lead to flawed, oppressive strategies. Diversity is on boards to create powerful opportunities for us to deepen our missions as organizations, relevance and advancement of the public good. So we're gonna dive into all of that a lot more deeper tonight. And so I wanted to go over what we'll be doing. On the next slide, we'll have our agenda, and we're gonna kick it off with two powerful panels, which I'm so excited to kick off. Our first one will be moderated by myself, and is the Executive Directors Tell All, where my fellow colleagues will speak about their perspective of why diversity is very important in their organizations and their attempts to also recruit for minority representation in their orgs. And our second panel will be led and moderated by Tempest Hazel of the Field Foundation, where she'll be speaking to board members of color that are currently sitting on boards to speak on what is it like to be on a board, why they decided to sit on the boards of the organizations they represent, and also what does their representation mean. And finally, we are actually going to have our first virtual nonprofit fair, where you guys are going to get into breakout rooms with two different nonprofits for 15-minute sessions and dive deeper in a lot of our topics, learn more about their organization and what opportunities that they have on their boards. So this is going to be a packed evening, and we are so excited to have you guys be a part of it. So before we get started, I would ask everybody to keep their mics on mute. Please leave comments and questions in the chat as we're discussing, and we will try to do our best to get to all of them. Also, please remember, unfortunately, everyone is not a part of this conversation, and it really needs to be amplified. So if you have any takeaways or sound bites that you think are powerful, please do share them with others and include the hashtag #EngageForChange and the simple good so that we can keep this conversation going. So with that being said, I'd like to invite my amazing executive directors, Jamal Cannon of The Block, Deb Jitler from Contextos, Saul Anderson from Lift Chicago, and Jamal Cole from My Block, My Hood, My City.
So happy to be here.
Yay. Thanks so much guys for joining this conversation and being here. I just wanted to kick it off real quickly. If all of you guys can introduce yourself, the mission of your org, and your simple good, because you know I'm gonna make you do that, so.
I'll start us off. I'm Jamal Cannon, founder, executive director of The Block. We spread the love of boxing to provide resources and opportunities to Chicago's youth. So if you're a kid on the west side of Chicago and I ask you to join a mentoring and tutoring program, that answer is typically no. But if I ask you to join a boxing program, you're more likely to engage in that opportunity. And we're able to kind of knock down some of the barriers that are in young people's way so that they can find a path to success.
I'm happy to go next. Saul Anderson. Go ahead, Jamal. You want to do your simple good?
I'm sorry about that. My simple good is just finding ways to step up that are within my skill set. You know, I'm a boxer with a teaching background. I got to step up with boxing and education and mash them together. So I just finding the small ways that I can step up that cater to the things that I'm good at.
Yeah, Saul Anderson, I'm the executive director of Lift Chicago. Lift is a national organization, helps families build the hope, money, and love that they need to break the cycle of poverty. So we're working with parents with at least one young child, a child younger than 8 in the home, helping parents on their path to economic stability, not only so they can stabilize their lives now, but to give their children a better chance through income in, quintiles and change the trajectory of their family in the long run. So we work, besides Chicago, we work in LA and New York, and we're headquartered in Washington, DC. My simple good today is I ordered an inflatable pool. I don't have like permanent pool money, but I ordered a big inflatable pool in my backyard, and I'm looking forward to blowing it up, sitting in the back with my son, and hanging out and enjoying some of this summertime sun since we got to be locked down in our houses.
I love that. Thank you. Deb, do you want to share?
Sure. My name is Deborah Gittler. I'm the founder and executive director of Contextos. We work predominantly in Central America and here in Chicago with young people affected by violence and trauma. Our work focuses on using personal narrative, personal story, to go from hurt to healing, and then the power of story to complicate assumptions and challenge prevailing narratives and stigmas. We foster healing and reflection, critical thinking and dialogue. And our goal is that we can help link people to tell their stories to other people who need to hear them.
What's your simple good?
My simple good, as I wrote in the chat, is I was just, running to get here on time. Those moments when you're walking and you just say hi to somebody on the street randomly, and it feels just like such an authentic moment, right? Like it feels connected, unexpectedly.
Beautiful. Jamal?
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jamal Cole. I'm the founder, executive director of My Block, My Hood, My City. We really don't have programs. We just adapt to needs of the community. So we're really good at pivoting like Jordan in the six, just whatever happens. If there's a meteor that hits Chicago tomorrow, you will see us out there like sweeping up meteor dust. If there's a snowstorm, we shovel snow for seniors. A heat wave, we deliver fans, deliver water to seniors. Through COVID-19, we've been sending well-being, making well-being calls to seniors and sending food. And of course, we just raised over, $1 million for small businesses all throughout Chicago that have been affected by looting. So really, man, I'm looking forward to learning from y'all. My simple good is just listening, because all y'all are so dope on this call, and I admire y'all so much. So I want to just do something simple and listen, take notes, and learn as much as I can.
Oh, thank you, guys. So I just wanted to hop right in. I know we've talked to you guys all individually, so I'm so excited for us to be together. I put up some statistics earlier on to open this up. Give me your thoughts, and why do you guys think that the nonprofit community is so predominantly non-POC?
I'd be happy to jump in there. I think, Priya, you laid out so many amazing points along those lines. But I think one of the things that we sometimes ignore is the racism on which our social services system was actually built, right? So you think about the history of Kelly. Essentially what it was wealthy white people saying that, that they would be, trying to kind of, in many ways, wash away guilt for exploiting people of color in the country by creating these charities. And the whole focus of them was big I giving to little you, right? And telling you what you need in order to stabilize your life, and, providing that service to you without any feedback from you. So, there's so many, there's racism built into that. There's literally every other ism is built into that process. And so that sort of ethos has permeated the social services system and the nonprofit system ever since its inception, and so just like it permeates all the rest of our lives, right? And I think then there's the other piece that, even as, we have many leaders of color here participating in this conversation today. And, I've been really studying and thinking a lot about the extent to which even we sort of take in white dominant leadership structures and sort of those sort of become ingrained in the way that we process and perceive leadership as well. So, we ask folks to sort of picture what a leader is. I think even sometimes people of color and people who are, still tend to sort of picture wealthy white man, right? Like that's what leadership looks like in our country. And then all of the perspectives, all of the sort of attitudes and views that they have, that group might have on the world permeates our entire society. And it just makes us sort of continue to replicate those cycles. Even as more people of color take over leadership positions in organizations, we can actually be guilty of it ourselves.
So I think you crushed that answer, and I just have one small thing to add. You know, once we set up a system that was rooted in racism, big I given to little u, and that system becomes set, it becomes a world where you need access to money and influence and power in order to start a nonprofit of your own. So it can now operate in that manner without any ill intent, without any interpersonal racism, and it can continue in that route.
Thank you. So given that, how do you guys think that incorporating diversity into like our boards can really help address the root cause of the inequities that we're trying to work towards?
I mean, I could jump off and just say that, when I started a nonprofit, I wanted a black dude to be the president of my board. And he told me no. I remember that. I remember that, and I feel like I also went to a lot of banks in my community, and I couldn't even get a bank account. And I feel like it's just because like there's 15 currency exchanges and no banks in your community. You know what I mean? And so you don't have financial literacy. You don't have a lot of things. And I feel like I learned as I started a nonprofit that guys that I met on the red line, guys that were lawyers, guys that were bankers. I started identifying board members based upon where I was weak at. Like if I needed an accountant, boom, I was gonna get an accountant. I need a lawyer, boom, I'm gonna get a lawyer. If I need somebody that's in finance, boom, I'm gonna get that. It wasn't until I started applying for grants that I realized that a lot of grantors really, they appreciate that you have, diversity in your board. And I was so happy that I chose my friends. I would say, man, like when you start in a nonprofit, organization, the board members are crucial, but you and your philosophy and your diligence and your basically I'm trying to say success is what you attract. It's not what you pursue. So I just want you guys to know that having a board is like when they're engaged, it's amazing. But man, like this is a faith walk, and everybody is looking up to you as a leader to walk that walk. You know what I mean? So that's what I would say.
I would add on, I mean, similarly, like I have boards in different countries and they look and feel and act differently. And the idea of building a board for diversity alone is counterintuitive to me. Like Jamal, you build boards based on what we need. And realistically, one of the things we need is money. And so there's an obvious in Chicago, Chicago's a small town realistically, and getting, finding board members with money is a rat race, right? So I think for me, it's not just a question of diversity, but what does it mean when my boss, I'm the boss to everybody I employ, and so I'm seen as the boss to everybody we serve in some way, right? But what does it mean when my bosses, what they look like, what they do, what their experience is, what is the tone and the tenor that has for everything that we do? And so I think that it becomes a part of the culture of the organization, right? It's the way we sound, not just the way we look. It's the background stories of where we come from. And so I work with mostly young people who deserve to have incredibly like breadth and wealth in terms of who they see that they could be when they grow up. And what they see as the power structure that they aspire to. So I think for me, when I think about my board and what I hope, yes, I want them to write checks, definitely. But I also want them when they stand in a room with the people that we care most about, that they're to be like, I guess in that same way of my simple good, that they're to be connectivity in a really meaningful way.
Jamal, do you want to share your perspective from a smaller organization perspective?
Yeah, I really appreciate Jamal giving his input on what he started doing when he was looking for a board when he was smaller, because that's an important route to go, and it leads to not only diversity on paper, but diversity of thought and filling in all the needs that an organization has. One of the scariest thing for me running a small nonprofit is to end up with a board where I look like a figurehead as opposed to ending up with a truly diverse board. We've actually decided not to bring anyone else onto the board for a while until we come up with until we've ensured that we are bringing in people of color to fill these spaces, because when we're able to do that, when we're able to bring in folks that are from the communities that we're serving, that have an understanding, is going to permeate through everything that we do. And it's also, as Deborah mentioned, the board is my boss. A lot of people think of executive directors as the people who run the show, and typically, for the most part, it is, but they can still fire me and hire somebody else. They can decide on the strategic direction of a nonprofit in ways that would bind me if we choose the wrong board. So it's incredibly important that we are strategic and we are inclusive and the board.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those perspectives. So what have your guys' experiences been recruiting people of color for your boards? And I know that could be different depending on the size of your board.
You talk when Deb talked about getting board members who write checks. You know, we've talked about wealth in communities of color. It often feels like I'm sure we're looking for board members of color. We're all talking to the same person like 15 minutes apart from one another, right? We're trying to chase the same folks, and they're stretched thin and have all these other obligations, and you know, you get a lot of no's because of that. You get a lot of folks who, you know, end up being stretched thin. I think a lot of folks of means, people of color of means, also actually can run the risk of overextending themselves because they want to say yes to a lot of organizations that they believe in, and they know there's just not ample opportunity to recruit other people of color to the board. And so that oftentimes makes it difficult for them to be impactful board members. So, you know, as much as the deck is stacked against us in terms of having people of color on our boards, is also stacked against board members of color to be able to deliver in the way that they want to as a board member, because it is about money, right? But it's also about expertise. It's about connections. It's about time. Sometimes it's just about like being able to grab a cup of coffee with one of your board members and just going through the things that are racking your brain, and like, and having a thought partner, right? And if you don't have the time to be able to do that, like the extent to which I can lean on a board member for that changes, right? And how you perceive of them in terms of your organization. So there's a lot of, you know, just a lot of different challenges in there that really are on both sides of the coin. We certainly want to, you know, point the finger just at you know, community members, but just like Jamal said right off the top, you know, he got a no the first time, and I've certainly gotten no's from you know, Black, brown board members as well, because they got a lot on their plate and are being asked by everyone.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like, you know, my board's small, my board in Chicago when we started small, a couple of white people who could write big checks, and then actively recruiting to have people who looked more like the people we were serving, the communities we're working in. The tension of coming in as a thought partner and a group of people who can write big checks, that's a lot harder to do than just come join a board, have a conversation. If you want to do that well, I think there needs to be a real process around that, and what, you know, what power looks like. And I'm not we're not like a well-funded organization, you know, to put effort and energy into really onboarding board members, training board members, being thoughtful around what that means to have people who their value is so obviously different in what they bring, but making it cohesive, because we can pretend, or I can pretend things are horizontal and everybody's at the table with the same thing. But when it comes down to it, when one person can write a 5-digit check and somebody else doesn't, there is implied power structures there. And for you know, me, in my experience, there's so much time thinking about those power structures in the work to then have to do that in board. And board maintenance is a real thing, right? Like, they are our bosses and we're their bosses, and you know, they can take a lot of time. I think Jamal said, you know, when they're good, they're really great, right? And sometimes, you know, it's, well, we're all, you know, interpersonal relationships. So I think it's harder to just go out and diversify a board. You know, there needs to be resources and effort to create a culture within a board and a culture within an organization. And if you're mission driven, the energy is being put toward the mission. It's really hard to find the resources to put that toward the board, in my experience.
I wonder how much of that expectation that board members be rich comes from what Sol was talking about earlier, and just the setup. And we've structured nonprofits to mirror the corporate for-profit capitalist world. in ways that I think are hurtful to our causes. The idea that a grant maker would look at our nonprofit differently because we don't have a rich board. But being rich doesn't mean that you have great strategic advice. Being rich doesn't mean that you know the direction that a nonprofit should go, or that you have the best interests of a nonprofit in mind. So a part of me really questions that. Like I think we can find ways to get money without relying on the board exclusively, and bring in people who know and understand the causes that we're trying to impact.
Jamil, you said it way better than I was gonna say it. My board members are people that I met volunteering. You know, people that I saw at the Inglewood 5K that were buying my T-shirts. You know, people that supported me early on when we were riding the red line together. The fact that somebody would come in right now with access to capital, I think that would be something. No, man. Like, listen, I don't believe in sustainability anyway. You know, personally, like, I feel like that. You know, a flower isn't sustainable. I'm not gonna like rack my brain on like trying to be around for like 20 years. I want to make sure I can do as much good as I can now and do the best I can at it. Take care of my staff now, and then, you know, it is what it is. So I don't put a lot of pressure on myself on that end. Again, I keep on saying, like, success is what you attract. It's really not what you pursue. So if I'm gonna pursue a board member based upon the connections they had, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's the right way to go about it. The people that show up for you at the beginning, when you are in grind mode, I think they are vested in the organization, and then it feels so much better when you guys are like successful together, because then you're like, man, remember we was like, you know, selling books downtown in front of State Street together? Like, yeah, we remember that. I think that's a lot. That's been my experience with.
I just, to the point Jamal made, I just, I had a thought. We think about being nonprofits and how often we have to make our dollars stretch. We have to have our staff do things that is not in their quote unquote job description. And like, you really think about it, who better to do that than a community member who has to do that in their own life? Who's better to help you think through those processes, right? But because of the way that we think about expertise, right, we don't actually ever do that. And then the unfortunate thing is that what we try to do is shoehorn people from the community into boards. And I've certainly been on boards that have a community representative on it, and it was pure tokenism, right? It's a person feeling completely uncomfortable, sitting in the corner all the time with all these folks who probably would hardly speak to them if they passed them in the street, but have them on the board in order to be able to say, we brought the community members into the board, or we brought, some diversity onto the board, right? And so, I appreciate the frame around board diversity. I also think another thing we need to start thinking about is how we actually push it to board equity, right? So how are we making it so that people of color, people who don't come from wealthy backgrounds, that their voice is actually heard, and in some cases even monetized, understand what the economic value of that is in a way that you can actually put it on level ground, right? You can say that, what, this person's advice, the time that they gave to us is worth just as much as your check, right? So you don't have a bigger voice in this moment. And we actually have to I think sometimes we have to do the whole thing about equity is like the shorter person gets more boxes under them, right? So we need to be, as leaders, also saying that out loud too, is that it's not less for you to come out and be, you're a parent representative on our board and one of our programs, but you show up for every event, you help us set up and take down, you're, picking people up and driving them here and there, you're helping coordinate babysitters for other folks we have participating in the program. Like, that has value, and we should stop treating it as less value than a check, because all that stuff makes us go, right? It still makes us go. It just might not show up in a bank statement or anything like that. So, I think we should also just be talking about the equity in our board membership as well, and not just diversity and representation.
I would just push back on that a little, because I know in my recruitment from community, I would have a hard time recruiting somebody to be on my board and work without pay when they need to be and should be paid for their work. And so I've had people that I thought would be great board members, and instead I have them as consultants or contractors, because I believe that their expertise means they deserve payment for their work, and my board does not get paid for their work. We allow our board member, with conflict of interest, that stuff can happen, but that for me has come up for sure in terms of trying to recruit here in Chicago and in communities, is that when I think about what the sweat equity is, I actually feel that I want to pay you for this work because that work is valuable. Your expertise is valuable. And so that for me, maybe is an internal struggle, because board participation is a volunteer participation, and that is a privilege in itself, right? So that's something that I don't have a strong grasp on personally, but I think about a lot. And it's certainly like people who I thought would be board members that now work for us or with us instead.
I definitely feel that bringing people on as consultants, that's an idea that I would like to entertain. And there are also, I'm thinking of the parents who want a say in, parents, community members, the people next door who cut our grass every other weekend. They want to say, they would love to have a say in our decision making and have that be a part of our bylaws, be a part of our actual processes. So I think there's a line to be walked there.
Also, to comment on what you said, I'm going to chime in too, is that I think there's a different relationship of giving back as people of color, even with our relationship of money and our relationship with struggle. And so I think that, through board participation, there's also this level of empowerment of saying, like, I can make a difference through my own volunteerism and initiatives, which is a struggle for folks to realize that, because it has to be at the right place at the right time of their life. And so I think that conversation might be even a separate conversation of how do we get more people of color to give back to our own communities and invest in our own communities. Just like right now, we have a big movement of buying Black, which we should be, but we should have been doing this, including all of our POCs in general that know that we have an equitable state and society. So, sorry.
Yeah, I just to double click on that. I come from the three previous generations of men above me were all Pentecostal Church of God in Christ preachers, right? And they weren't drawing no salary. Our church was not salaried minister position, right? It's, you do this, the deacons in our church, the mothers in our church, the folks who are cooking, for church get-togethers, like the giving back to the community and giving what they have to the community is an expression of love. And so I do hear you, Deb, and I agree, like this is the struggle. That's why we have to have this panel, because it's so hard to figure out the balance. But I also think, like, I have found, we work in Bronzeville, and I've found the folks in Bronzeville, the folks who are the most strapped, who you would assume have the least to give, are the most giving of their time, their resources, their knowledge, their energy. They want to give that to other people because they don't have, that's the way that they show love to their folks. And so, I think it's a fine line to walk, and we do want to, make sure that we're walking it right. But also, we should give folks the also understand that, like, they can choose too, right? If they don't want to do it, for no pay, like, they know what they need to do in their life, and they know, folks know what they need to do to balance, like, they're giving back and they're getting to, to keep their family.
I just would add my experience, Priya, it's not what can they do to do more. I think people of color are doing so much, right? Like, so in their communities, in our communities, people are doing so much. And to say that they're not doing enough or they're not doing it right, that's just not been my experience. There's reasons why it doesn't look the way we might hope it would look, or some other people have told us it's supposed to look. I think it's also important. I don't know, Saul, if you are, but I think most of us are founders. And so I think that building a board as a founder is different than building a board if you're not a founder. From what I hear, like, and resonates, I have the privilege of choosing a board that I like and I enjoy, and they can be thought partners and we can be rigorous together. But I know, and Jamal, I love what you said. I was hoping when COVID happened, I was like, oh, maybe this is the thing that'll break us and we can finally be done. Just like, I think that at some point, if you think about moving on from your organization, the role of boards shifts, right? Because as the organization has institutionality, it's not necessarily up to the director to like their board or to choose their board. And I think that it's important to discuss, because while that might not be our situations, that certainly is real for a lot of people.
And I just want to.
I like my board. Someone might be on this, but I like them all.
I like my board too.
I love my board. I know Tyrone, he's on the next one. Just to clarify, I don't think that there's a wrong way to help. And I don't think that, people are doing it wrong. I think that there is a lack of understanding, and that's why we're having this discussion in general, within minority communities, immigrant communities, which is what I'm from, that the opportunity to make an impact through a nonprofit, through a board position, through a leadership position in your community is accessible. That's just not a conversation that we typically have. I know a lot of my friends are people of color, and they're not even considering joining boards. And they are young professionals, completely equipped and able to give back. And, I think it's really just like an education piece that we can better equip folks of color to be in this space. So I'll stop it. I do want to move on to another question that I did have with you guys, and we kind of touched on it. The impact of fundraising that we have on our organizations, and how that is like a power control. Deb, you did allude to it. How do we change that, right? There is a power factor with folks that fundraise and then the necessity of need of how our nonprofits are working. And it does allude to capitalism a bit. How do we change that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, for me, I always wanted to start my own brand, and I read a few books. You could say 5 years by reading a book. I read Mark Ecko, Unlabeled, and I read Damon John, who started FUBU. And his book is called The Power of Broke. But there were some practical lessons in there on how to sell merchandise, and it's easy stuff like, hey man, send 50 hoodies to the radio station, and when somebody famous comes there, just say, hey, can you give them one so they can post it on Instagram? Then you absorb their followers. It's simple stuff like that. It's not easy, but it's really simple. I think you can follow. I think just being I don't ever want to, I couldn't get grants at the beginning. So I was like, when a grantor would send me an email, the first sentence I could tell I wasn't, we've got all these applications and you just weren't, I already knew what that was going to say. So I was just so frustrated that I just started I set up a social, I don't even like calling it nonprofit. I want it to be social impact. So I can sell merchandise to pay for 20% of my budget. I can talk to corporations for 30% of my budget. I can do grants for 30% and then individual donations for the other 20%. You always want to be diverse because you don't want nobody to have a battery in your back. You want to make sure you can support yourself. But I will still say that, man, this work is a faith walk. I got my home foreclosed starting a nonprofit in Chicago. That's embarrassing. Like when you have to go to the judge and you're like, oh, you're the My Block, My Hood, My City guy. Oh, I understand now how you're taking these kids around the city. Like that stuff is embarrassing. But that happened to me. You know what I mean? I've had to see, I've had to sell books downtown on State Street, in front of Foot Locker just to buy food on the weekend. This ain't for everybody, you know what I mean? But I will say that if you do what you love to do, you'll organically build relationships that'll help you be successful because they'll feel your passion. They'll feel that and they're like, I want to support that. So I would just say, if this is what you want to do, if this is what you love to do, then you're going to be successful because ultimately you're helping people. So.
I
would
just
agree
think
that being broke is part of this game and learning how to hustle, also friends and family begging for money. My organization's turning 10 and it's been a remarkable thing to see how the relationship with finances have been different. I think we have to be honest also, organizations do different work. So what we need from our boards and what we need from fundraising is going to look different. I think we provide services and we partner with organizers, but we aren't an organizing entity. And so in my mind, frankly, rich people need to be taxed more so that our schools are better, funded so that they can pay us for this work. I shouldn't have to fundraise to be doing work in schools. You know what I mean? Or to be doing work in incarceration sites or to be doing work in communities. The simple good should be in every school. Boxing should be available in every school. And so it is, this is I can get off that pedestal, but we shouldn't have to do this. And I think that depending upon what our work looks like and what our mission is in terms of direct service, advocacy, the needs for us in terms of how we can get money is going to be really different too. And that the commitment as bosses that we have to our staff is a terrifying thing in a fundraising world,
Don't get off that pedestal, Deb, and stay on it forever. That's literally what I was about to say. It's like how much stuff are we investing in that doesn't strengthen our communities, right? And we look at, well, maybe we don't want to get on specifics of this, but you look at our military budgets and things like that. How far our military budget surpasses every other budget line item in our entire budget. Are you telling me we can't find dollars so that kids? Some of you all might know Pastor Chris Harris, in Bronzeville. He talked about, we had a Disrupt Poverty Summit, Jamal and Priya were panelists. You guys heard him talking about how his son has one of his same books with his name in it in his high school. Give me a break. What are we doing if we can't give kids brand new books? Do you know what has happened in between the 20 years when he was in school and this kid, we mapped the human genome. They're apparently doing math differently. My son's about to go to school next year. I'm not ready for this box math that they do now. I don't understand it. I got to learn it. I got to be studying along with him. But all of this stuff has changed about the way that we learn, and he's got the same book 20 years later. Where are we putting our money? We have allowed our government to disinvest from our communities. We have not held our elected officials accountable at the local, state, or federal level to doing that, and we've allowed them to create these narratives of fear about things, right? We fear our neighbors. So the city of Los Angeles, 56% of their budget can be the police. We fear one another. We allow our military budget to be so big because we fear people in other nations because they speak a different language or have a different religion. And we don't have any love for the people who are right across the street from us or the people in the same boat for us. And so we allow our elected officials to put money in things that we don't need to the extent to which they're funded. So, you know, we shouldn't get off that pedestal. We should stay on it forever, because that's the foundational problem here, right? Is that we're asking even foundations and all these, like, we're asking foundations and individuals to make up for this gap that, like, the government is that has created for us. Like, they should be investing in this. If they don't want to provide it directly, they should be investing in the folks who are doing good work.
Saul, I can't wait to meet you in person because we're working together. I just wanted to respond to something. I think Xavier, if that's how you pronounce your name, what's really important is that, you know, when money is restricted, and I share with Jamal passionately, you know, not to follow grants too much, because restricted funding is not helpful. And I believe the reason I don't mind having rich people on my board is because I'm trying to get all the money from the rich people that should have been going to the right place in the first place. And so, you know, and that happens through networks. And so it is a challenging thing, but unrestricted funds are hard to come by. We've been able to, in the States, we're able to do a lot of work that's contract. So I have a lot of flexibility. Most of our work is in the developing world, which comes through bilateral aid, the United Nations, European Union, and that is incredibly rigorous funding sources that make you have to turn in every receipt for everything. And they only give you 75% of what you need to accomplish. So you have to have unrestricted funds in order to pay staffing. And that model is, you know, it's set up for organizations to fail. I think also that, you know, it's kind of come out of style, but the idea that 99% of the money we get should go directly into the hands of the people we serve, or 90%, and not support our staffing and infrastructural costs, that's not helpful. And I think for the most part, we've learned that that's untrue, but I know I have people who want to be on my board who've read GuideStar and they're coming in talking to me like that. That's not particularly helpful. The other thing Xavier wrote about is just pro bono support. I've learned really quickly, I don't know if you guys share this, oftentimes free help isn't really helpful and it's not really that good. I'm sure there are many people here from Deloitte and McKinsey, you know, God bless you, but the offers for like the capacity building workshops and stuff, we do that because we hope that by doing that, we'll get a board member or get a donation. And it takes a lot of money and time to sit and, you know, plan so we can get a deck that just sits in a Google Drive folder. So I think all of that stuff gets caught up also in this illusion of generosity that takes up a lot, at least for me, it takes up a lot, or used to take up a lot of my time, and it's not actually helpful.
I want to piggyback off of that and say, oftentimes free help ain't free. And a lot of that feel goes into what happens in boards, where if a board member is joining, board membership is activism, but often it's performative activism. So people are joining boards to boost their social standing or draw attention to their businesses or to show how good they are, but they get decision-making power out of that. And what that allows to happen is for board members to make decisions that center themselves, that center their businesses, to center whatever it is that they brought with them into the position. So we end up with board members that find it hard to see what's best for the community because that's not what brought them into the work to begin with. I think that is it's a problematic part of filling our boards with the wrong people.
So I wanted to talk about, you know, there's so many challenges with who to incorporate the world that we're living in right now in general, and just how it operates. And I'm so glad that Saul and Deb, you guys brought up, especially we do international work in Africa every year. And I always say the supplies I bring to our students in Africa are actually the same that I bring over here. They're not very different. So even in the space that we're living in is very flawed. So what do you guys think? Like, if we lived in a perfect world where we have more people of color, different socioeconomic standings participating in community work and our equity issues that we're discussing, how do you think that would impact things? Would it change things? What are your thoughts on what type of change that can make?
If you want more people of color on your board, you can, I'll tell you how. You have to ask, and that's it. Like, ask. Like, I feel like you have to, you know, one thing that I learned from selling books on the corner is that you can You know, if you're a good person that sells books in front of Foot Locker, you know, if you're good, 2 out of every 100 people are gonna say yeah. If you're great, 3 out of every 100 people are gonna say yeah. It don't matter how good you are, like 97 people are still gonna say no. So I feel like if you know, you just have to be diligent, and again, you're gonna attract that. But I think, man, open your mouth and ask, and also do your research on what they've done, engage them, and like have a lunch with them. And I think that just approach it with like empathy. You know what I mean? Like, be real. And I think that they will, because you ultimately are the brand. Like, you are it. Like, your passion is what's gonna pull people in. You know, so I would just say, like, just approach things with empathy and make sure that you continue to ask directly.
I would say getting more people involved, more people of color involved in boards will increase the understanding of the issues that a community is facing. There are nonprofits with that serve Black youth that think the only problem with Black youth is that there are not enough like white youth. So they have like an assimilation, a take on things, and that's the programming that they drive. There are school boards with boards that want to educate your kids, but only enough so that your kids can one day work for their kids. And that drives the curriculum that gets built, the educational structure, the punishment and incentives that they bring. So we've got to get a board that has a stake in the issues. We need boards that understand the issues deeply so that we can come up with interventions that the community agrees with and needs.
Saul or Deb, do you guys have any thoughts on how the city would look different if we had more involvement? Deb, you're on mute, sorry.
We would need less nonprofits. I mean, there's too many of us out here. I'll be honest, I think we do really good work. I think it's really important work. I think it's unique work, and I have seen what it can do. And Illinois has more nonprofits than any other state. I mean, there's just too many, and some of us need to merge. Some of us need to accept that it is time to move on. And I want a board that pushes me hard so we can do the best work we can. And when our time comes, we can move on, we can collaborate, we can join. You know, Priya, how often have you and I talked about working together and how hard it is? And so I just think the more that we have board engagement, the more we're gonna find collaboration, the more we're gonna be able to leverage resources. We're all fighting for this, you know, these same small pots and having to replicate intent sometimes that it should be unnecessary, but because of the way things are structured, Jamil, I think you're right. You know, we're all working within these structures, even if we don't want to. So I would just say the goal would, you know, we would not be needed as much if we had more support.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. In a perfect world, yeah, there wouldn't be nonprofits because our society would make sure that we wouldn't need a safety net because everyone would be safe, right? That would be the perfect world. But I think in order to get there, it's important to deal in the real world, and it's important to, you know, to bring more people from a vast array of experiences and backgrounds to truly understand what we need to do to build a society to get there. And just kind of going back to my earlier point, that means weighing the voices of everyone equally. That means, you know, understanding that checks don't necessarily mean more than sweat equity, you know, depending on, you know, how you want to build that out, or if you want to pay folks for that as well. But just understanding that those things aren't necessarily more valuable. They're only valuable because of the racist structures of our society, right? Like, that's why money means more than anything, is because the people with money wanted to keep the other people without money from having any power, right? And so that's why that exists, and that's the only reason that we can find value for that, and bringing people from just more backgrounds to really push us as a society, right? Like, not just push our organizations, but allow us to come together, allow us to work together more effectively, work with our communities and not just in them and for them, in a way that's going to drive the change that we're all talking about here. I think any good nonprofit leader should be trying to put themselves out of business. Any one of us should. And that doesn't mean it's going to happen in our lifetimes, but that's what we should be pushing for in the way that we work to structure our boards and the way we structure our organizations.
Amazing. Oh, this is so wonderful. Jamal, did you guys want to chime in? Or I'm sorry, you guys. I already did. Okay, great. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone because I felt like that was a very important piece. Cool. So I guess this will be our final question. If anybody has questions, and I'm sure I missed all of them, so please feel free to drop more in the chat. How do you guys, you know, there's a lot going on, there's a lot changing, there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of confrontation, there's a lot of honesty. How do you want the Chicago nonprofit sector to look different by a year from now? Ooh, I stumped all
Jump in.
y'all.
I jump in. I want to. I would like to see a lot of nonprofit leaders I see in Detroit or Washington, D.C. or New York City. I don't ever have coffee with them in Chicago, but I always see them outside of the city. So I think we could do a better job at building a coalition and learning, or collective and learning from each other. And if there's a rally going on in North Lawndale or South Shore or wherever, maybe we can team up and just be more strategic together. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, I think that's the number one thing I'm looking forward to, is getting to learn from more nonprofit leaders. And I don't like that word nonprofit either. I think I hate that word because it doesn't make people want to work for you. Like, oh, a nonprofit. No, I want to make money. I think we're more like social impact orgs, and I like that a lot better. So.
Social change orgs. I like that.
The idea of collaboration has come up quite a few times, and I want to make sure that we're being actionable on it. Listen. I want coffee with all of y'all because there are lines that run very close to all of us. There are projects that we can be working on, and it's something that I want to be intentional about in the very near future, because I have a lot to learn from y'all, and our city has a lot to benefit from us coming together.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that too. I think of how much our organizations actually replicate the some of the challenges we see in our city writ large around how people don't leave their side of town, right? And I think about how unfortunate it would have been without this panel. Jamal's on the west side, on the south side. Without this, I might have never met him, right? And now there's an opportunity for us to think about there are absolutely, children of the parents in our program who could so benefit from the work that he's doing. And the fact that it's just so hard to get even to folks who are doing good work that you should be aligned with. It's just so hard to get to other people. And, there's this whole sort of, cottage industry of co-working spaces popping up, and they're all for startups and for-profit industries. And I think, what if we took more ownership of some of our space and we stopped building all of our headquarters down in the loop, and started building places where we could come together and collaboration was natural for us, right? It doesn't even necessarily need to be around, it could be, multi sort of focus agencies, coming together and working in the same spaces, or finding areas in the community where I should be able to pick up and go to the West Side Anti-Poverty Center and meet folks who are doing work like me and bond with them and build with them, right? There's opportunities for us to do that. These are also things we could be pushing our board for. Another way that we can push some of our board members to step up is space that they might own, or connections to people to space that they might own, to help us stop paying so much for rent so we can just do the doggone work that we're trying to do, right? Those sort of things are there too. So but that is collaborative spaces where we could be building this outside of a Zoom panel. I guess it'd have to be a Zoom panel for the next few months, but generally speaking, it wouldn't be a Zoom panel. We'd be doing it face to face.
I just want to say last thing, Jamil, the boxing gym that you got, that's with the church seats, man. Amazing, bro. Amazing. I want to come over there. You got to train me, man. You got to try to lose some weight. You got to train me, bro.
I got you. So you inspired me a few weeks ago when you mentioned just wake up, you get the 15 words. I don't have them memorized, but basically what's something I can do right now from our community. So we put together a food pantry. We whipped it together, and now we're doing that twice a month. It's just, what can we do for our people right now? I could have called you, got some advice on it, but we got through it. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you too, man.
I would just, going back to the question of next year, first of all, I want to be invited to Box too. And I would hope for more organizing and less programs. And I run programming, but really, I don't know if you guys, how many of you saw Marissa Morales's emails when she came out with the Woods Fund, I think. They're not an enormous foundation, but I think she hit it on the head, right? We are so busy, and read nonprofit as fuck. Nonprofit AF, I guess. We are so busy, each in our own little spaces. And I'm only putting out this fire because this is the fire I'm in charge of. But we need to be out here knocking on doors, and we need to be out here advocating, because most of the people in the city don't want it to be like this. And so I would hope for, I want a board that helps us link to advocacy, link to the organizers, because young people do need to be served. But if we aren't helping change our policies and change our representation, it's sort of all for naught. And I realize that we have a lot of work for that. And it brings you right back, Priya, like, what do I need in a board? I need a board that keeps, that isn't, a fan of the work, but that keeps us real and committed to what our real goal is. And we might have programs that we implement, but ultimately our real goal is to serve people. And we can only serve them best if I do have those coalitions, those collaborations, and there's more organizing happening in our city.
Well, I appreciate all of you guys individually, collectively, and I so appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts. I'm just going to this conversation made me think of a quote that I really admire: "My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together." And that's how I really feel with, our community, that we are trying to do this difficult work within. And I hope this has shed light with folks that are listening in about the context that we're working in order to alleviate it and make it a lot better and more productive for the same constituents. We're all serving the same constituents right together. So I appreciate y'all. Hang on tight. We're actually gonna now move on to our next panel with our amazing board members, with Tempest Hazel, Field Foundation. So I'm gonna invite her to come up. Everybody send your love in the chats for our panelists here today. And we're gonna invite our board members on. Thanks, guys.
Hello, thanks, Priya. So hello, everybody. That was a really great discussion, I just want to say, and it's almost hard to follow that up, but we will try and pivot to the board service discussion. But first, I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Tempest Hazel, so I'm the Arts Program Officer at the Field Foundation. And to tell you a little bit about the Field, we do our grant making through a racial equity lens. And we focus on supporting community-based organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous, POC folks, and doing work in arts, justice, media and storytelling, and leadership investment. So we do this work as a way of addressing the divestment, which is something that came up in the last conversation, but the divestment that Chicago South and West Side neighborhoods have experienced and continue to experience. And also in order to invest in the people and the ideas that are pushing our city forward, really to a more just and equitable future. And as a foundation that prioritizes those communities and seeks to amplify that work, we often have conversations about leadership and who's holding decision-making power in front of and behind the scenes. And that really determines how we do our grant making. So much so that we require that at least 60% of our annual funding goes to organizations that are led by, meaning 51% or more of the board and the staff is folks of color. So really trying to get at the heart of how decisions are made, who you're serving, and how you're a reflection of those communities. So I'm really excited to be speaking to this group, and I'd like to start and pass on the introductions by asking everyone to tell me a little bit about yourself and what boards you serve on and why you chose to lend your time and your skills to that board. So maybe we'll start with Xavier.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Xavier Ramey. I'm Chief Executive Officer of a social impact consulting firm. It's called Justice Inform. We work across the country primarily on issues of organizational, societal, and personal inequity. Everything from corporate social responsibility in major corporations over to equity-focused philanthropy with foundations, all the way over to diversity, equity, inclusion with all types of organizations. Like nonprofits, nonprofit board diversity, these types of things. we end up getting involved in that. I currently serve on 2 boards. I'm the secretary of the board for an arts-focused nonprofit called Young Chicago Authors. I've been a part of that board since 2012, and probably, we can maybe talk about board tenure. But I've been a part of that organization since I was a young person in Chicago, and I was writing, and I was a poet, and I was one of the students in the program back in the early 2000s. I'm also on the board of the Chicago Center for Arts and Technology. It's one of the larger arts and tech organizations in the North Lawndale neighborhood, serving North Lawndale, Little Village, and Pilsen. I join boards primarily because I think it's important, one, to stay tuned in to what's going on in the nonprofit sector. I also think it's really important that you show up, because boards need really invested leaders. They need folks, particularly as you move on and up and around in the world and in your city, you bring those people who are with you. And so when I started my company, I knew that that would bring the boards along with them. As I expand networks, then those networks are now of service to the boards I'm on. And so I look at it through growing my own personal investments in neighborhoods and issues that I care about, but secondarily growing the organizations, because I think I'm gonna do a lot of dope stuff in the world, and I want folks and organizations and communities I care about to come along with me.
Pass it on to Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Rice. I currently serve as president of the board of directors for Chicago Hopes for Kids, which provides educational support for children living in homeless shelters in Chicago. We currently have programs in 9 shelters across the city, which includes programming 4 days a week with literacy support, homework help, and enrichment to try to mitigate some of educational regression. Children experiencing homelessness are at risk of falling behind 3 to 6 months in school with every move. So Chicago Hopes for Kids works with our children to try to bridge this gap. So in general, I'm really passionate about being an advocate and mentor for underserved children, and joining the board of Chicago Hopes for Kids has just been an amazing and unique opportunity to make an impact in the community and work with a diverse and inclusive board that has similar values, so we can really advance the mission of the organization and make a positive impact in the city.
And then I would pass it to Tyrone.
Hi everyone, Tyrone Jordan. I am an insurance consultant. I'm Vice President of Business Development for Marshall McClellan Agencies out of Michigan, actually. I've only been in Chicago for 5 years. And I sit on 2 nonprofit boards, one being the Simple Good that you guys already know about because our founder Priya, as well as GEAR, Giving Every Athlete Resources, a nonprofit out of Detroit. The focus on that nonprofit is helping figure out solutions to fund programs in athletics for school districts because of the pay to play and the issues with students there not being able to fund their athletics, and especially in the city of Detroit. So I've always been tied to schools, and my work in the insurance world has always been around K through 12, finding solutions to take funding and redirect it back towards curriculum and places, not towards insurance and other issues that they have. And so naturally sitting on boards of nonprofits that work with schools have been important to me because the work they're doing has always been a passion of mine.
And then last but not least, make sure I'm saying this correctly, Yoli? Yes.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Yoli Valencia, and I sit on 2 boards. One is Casa Central here in the city of Chicago, and it's a social service agency that helps families with social issues, including domestic violence, youth, seniors. The other board that I sit on is Prospanica, and this one is an association of Hispanic MBAs and business professionals. And my personal mission is rooted in my own experience as a daughter of immigrants that had many firsts in her family. And so I'm on a quest to disrupt the narrative for our community when it comes to education and closing that generational wealth gap, the gap to generational wealth. Both boards that I currently sit on really allow me to serve and provide the platform that I'm looking for to reach individuals similar to myself. One of the main focuses that I'm super passionate about is the summer enrichment program that we lead through Prospanica, and it's a program that occurs in the month of July, and our focus is to reach underserved communities, specifically from Black and Brown communities that are underrepresented. And what we offer is is, again, rooted in my own experience. When I, finished high school, I knew nobody in my family that could say, hey, this is a career that you can take a look at, or this is what you should do next. I, instead started my family first and then pursued higher education in a more non-traditional way. And there's a lot of that in our community still, where we are marginalized or stereotyped within our own families. So with the summer enrichment program, it enables us to really reach those families and have the conversations. When I look at my own experience, I don't believe that it was rooted in my parents didn't want what was best for me. They were new to the country. They were learning. They were trying to figure things out. And there was this sense of fear. And we still see that when you look at the migrant communities. So I just want to be able to reach out and help those individuals and communities to help them obtain the resources that exist for them.
So I want to dive right into the conversation about your board service. And for each of you, would you describe your board as inclusive? And in other words, do the people on your boards reflect the folks that you're serving or that the organization serves, or what Chicago looks like? And how does that impact how your organization is able to connect with Chicago communities?
So I'll go ahead and go first. So I don't think the board is very diverse in both instances at Casa Central and with Prospanica, and that's because these boards were built with individuals that experience what these communities need, right? We came together and we realized that our own community is missing something. However, I do think that it would be beneficial to have some diversity on our boards, and especially allies. We need allies that can offer a different perspective to help us improve our community.
Anyone else want to tackle that question?
Sure. I'll say that Chicago Hopes for Kids is actively seeking to build a diverse and inclusive board. I think of diversity and inclusion in terms of intersectionality, so not only race, but also gender and age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, disability status. So when you take all of those considerations and characteristics in, I think we have a very diverse board, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the population that we're serving. 80% of children experiencing homelessness in Chicago are Black, and our board is not of that composition. So there's certainly room for improvement, not only in terms of race, but all other types of nationality backgrounds and disability status. But we're working towards it. And I believe, again, that we have a lot of allies. Everyone has the same values. We're working towards the same mission. And so there's a lot of positive change happening.
The boards I'm on are fairly diverse. One of them is, it's a place-based organization in North Lawndale. All of the board are not all people of color, and they're not all African-American, but the majority of them are. Many of them are also have some level of connection to those communities as well, whether it be they live there or they grew up there or otherwise. For Young Chicago Authors, there's definitely more diversity on that board, partly because it's bigger. One of the things I want to just pull out is that when you have small boards, diversity becomes more of a challenge, right? If you have 4 people on your board, I mean, what is diversity then, really? You're dropping maybe one or two people who are, not the same, but the question of the value that's added to that is different, and it imposes a different challenge around board maturation and growth versus board diversity. But I think that, particularly for Young Chicago Authors, because we also have a lot of vocational diversity, we have people from different fields, it creates a different level of conversation. I think especially about organizations like YCA, where the goal is to create a certain type of outcome for us and our youth. We want them to be, you know, young people who can actually make a living being artists. And so that one of the things where I think we need to grow is actually in having more artists on our board to inform the types of practices and structures and such. We have a lot of other types of folks, but we need, I think that, you know, from a maturation standpoint, a governance standpoint, a diversity standpoint, the vocation of an artist is really important. And right now I'm one of the few folks who is, who's an artist on the board.
I'll just add really quickly, I mean, the Simple Good, we do have, I feel like, a much more diverse board than a lot of organizations. And I mean, the reason Priya, we're always still trying to grow. And so the reason I know Priya was heavily involved in putting this together is because something we're actively looking at and making sure that we're keeping it top of mind as we make decisions on who we recruit. I would say that my board in Detroit is not diverse at all. We're serving a community there in Detroit that is 90% Black, and our board is only 25% Black. And so it's not something we've addressed. And part of being a part of this panel and learning from all you guys is to take things back to them and create a strategy on how we change that, because I think it adds a ton of value.
Yeah, I thank you all for answering that. I kind of want to go back to the question of how does that impact how you feel the organization is serving its community, and I also would kind of love to hear from the EDs in the room, in the chat, to that question as well. How does it actually impact how your organization is able to do its work, whether that's a positive or negative way?
I can hop in. I think, you know, one of the big gets you get with a more diverse board is you get a variety of perspectives, experiences, and networks. And from a board perspective, and it's particularly, you know, we have to distinguish between operational boards that are kind of in the work. Like you may have boards that are comprised of actual specialists. Like there's some organizations that my firm works with where the board it's all volunteer, but they've got 2 staff and the board are doing most of the work. Versus a board that's a strictly governing board where they're coming in bi-monthly, quarterly meetings, minutes, approvals, budgets, executive review, those sorts of things. There's a different functionality. I think that when you have, you know, both of the boards I'm on are governing boards. They're not operational boards. And there's way more distance between us and, you know, our ultimate client, young folks or the adults in some of the workforce programs. And I think that's that's like how they're built. That's just how they're built. Whether that's a plus or a minus, it really depends on the nature of the organization, I think, and what the staff really need and what the ED needs in terms of being supported. But I think it's really important to make that distinction between those two. I will say that it's hard to understand where to jump in on the work often. I think as a board member, I often, you know, I want to, you know, Robert's Rules of Order say I go through the executive, right? The executive staff person. And, you know, there's like that overreach, right? I've had, you know, board crisis is something I hope we can talk about as well, like where you have certain crises in the organization and what is the role of the board, particularly when you have identity crises. I mean, crises related to identity. So for instance, issues of racial discrimination, issues of sexual violence, like those sorts of things where the board is absolutely necessary for both financial, legal, and other types of challenges. And how then does diversity play a role in either mitigating the damage that's possible for those, or how the board plays a role in finding resources or stepping in where the organization might be so small that they can't afford specialists, but the board member is able to volunteer in because that's what they do. They are a lawyer or they are a contract specialist, or, you know what I mean? Like that's where that vocational diversity becomes so important.
Anyone else tackle that question?
Yeah, I would just echo that and say it's very important to have a board with a wide variety of professional backgrounds. This board participation is much more than fundraising. I know a lot of people think of boards as mostly raising funds, but the one I'm on does do a lot of operational activities and leadership and oversight, working on the strategic plan, advising the executive director, reviewing the annual budget, approving different expenses. There's a lot of different factors at play, and everyone has a voice, and it's very important to get a variety of perspectives on that. So it's great to have a team that you can collaborate with, and everyone is very respectful of one another's opinions and really is trying to reach the most productive goal in the end.
Sure. So I want to touch on some of the things that were already talked about as far as challenges go. Can each of you speak to what some of the biggest challenges have been in your board service, and whether that's fundraising? Some of you have talked about recruitment, if it's about participation, communication, power dynamics. This might also be a space to talk about what was brought up when it comes to when things come up and what the board's role is to address some of those things. But what have been some of your biggest challenges in your board roles?
I guess I am fairly new to the board world. I'm so excited I'm able to be on this panel with very experienced people. I'm learning a lot. I'm gonna be I've saved the chat 3 times already. But I would say coming in the middle of this, I started in October with the Simple Good and trying to learn the dynamics of the board, trying to fundraise during a pandemic, as everyone knows how challenging that has been. And then trying to be connected to the communities, learn how to connect within the communities. My reason of joining the boards, once I was asked, was to try to be a face, a role model to the communities that we were serving, to be a part of the different programs and be able to go out there and be in it with the children that we were serving, because I felt like when I was growing up in the Flint area, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me in these type of roles. And so that was my biggest push. And so those are things we were trying to do. And now this pandemic has sort of slowed it down for both my organizations. So I'm hoping to find the right strategies to be able to come out on top after that.
I'll go next. So one of the biggest challenges is getting individuals to serve on boards. We tend to always get white allies that want to sit on board, but we also want individuals that can relate to the students. And the other challenge that we're seeing is we get folks to engage and be involved with the board, but then it's just something that they're able to show on paper and say, yes, I'm on this board, but are they really passionate about the cause? Are they really, engaging and working for the cause? And I think that's been, in addition to funding, which was previously stated in the earlier panel, I think just finding the right individual to really commit. And we have, in our community, we have really smart, brilliant individuals that are very hardworking and heads down, and it's trying to get those individuals to realize that they have something to bring to the table, to create the social change that we're trying to create within our community.
Yeah, I can't even count the challenges. I'm thinking about like community challenges. I remember when Trayvon Martin was killed and the George Zimmerman verdict came out, and our organization turned around, and the big question was, what does our organization have to do with creating a space for conversation and safety for Black and brown youth in this moment as they process it? And how does our board then, show up? How do we leverage our facility? How do we establish those accountable agreements to moderate that type of conversation while also making it one that's inclusive and accountable, but generative as well, right? How are we centering community in that space? Licensing agreements are tough. Like when you work with artists, you're always talking about intellectual property. And when an organization is utilizing that intellectual property for its own programming, then it's a question of, well, then what are the rights and the royalties and licensing, and you got to get the lawyers involved and all that kind of stuff, right? That's really complex legal stuff to deal with. And your relationships can hang in the balance with some of your most important staff if you don't handle that well. You know, we've had situations, you know, when the Me Too movement really started to take off, you know, and people were starting to be far more open about where they've experienced sexual violence and harm, specifically from men in their life. You know, what organization was that not a question? I mean, every board was wondering, how do we keep young people safe in these types of spaces? And so, you know, we were working through that as claims started coming up, you know, and how do you take a non-litigious approach that is community informed and invested relative to what the public expects of this organization, right? Where, let's say, some other situations where there were no, you know, the world was on fire, but y'all were straight, but you're seen as a leader. And so how do you then speak? And what is your message? And what is most appropriate? What are the controls you have around marketing before something goes public and potentially backfires? You know, it's all that kind of stuff. You know, what do you do with executive transition? The board's main role, particularly when a CEO or executive director is gone, is to ensure the longevity of the organization. You know, I've been over an organization, both organizations I've been in have had at least, you know, 2 executive transitions since I've been a member. And how do you maintain the ship with a crew of volunteer boards members? You know, the audit, annual, you know, like it's a lot. Like it's, you know, if you're really, really invested and you're there and you want to ensure this organization stays afloat, there are so many things. You know, you get a restricted grant like we did from the MacArthur Genius Fund, and it's $500,000, but it's got to be invested restricted. And then somebody like me comes in and says, well, where's that money going to be invested? Because we can't invest in institutions that our students are protesting, right? And so then what does our investment policy look like? And what fund manager are we going to go with? And what does diversity and equity look like when we're talking about paying these fees? And then how are we allocating those funds justly? You know, those are all the complexities that you end up dealing with, you know, when you're like really, really there on those boards.
Tanya, did you want to tackle the question?
Sure. I was just thinking about how to raise awareness about the organization and respond to the times in, you know, an appropriate way as well. Just thinking about our organization's recent Black Lives Matter statement. I was very privileged to work with our executive director and staff on developing a statement that reflected all of our values. It's very important for the organization to come out and make a statement at that time. Also, just thinking about COVID and everything that the organization has had to do to pivot and relay resources and be able to provide programming in a remote way. The board has also had to postpone our gala, which was scheduled to be this month, to November 11th. It's our 3rd gala. When I joined the board, I was actually a fundraising chair, and so that was one of my first major responsibilities, was organizing the gala at Garfield Park Conservatory. But this year we've had to delay. We're thinking about how to, you know, continue to engage our supporters and then also have contingency plans as needed for COVID. So there's just a lot of moving parts. We want to continue to provide resources for our children during this time, but we also want to be responsive to our communities and generate funds too. There's just a lot of moving parts as a board member that, you know, you're working on to try to support.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like between the pandemic and the movement work that's happening, there's a lot that leadership within organizations are having to respond to pretty quickly. So we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to give time for the last question of what would you say to someone who was interested in joining a board? What advice would you give, and what would you tell them to consider before making that decision?
What I usually, when I'm talking to a younger generation, and me saying that, now I'm going to age myself. But usually when I'm talking to a younger generation, I try to spin it in a way where they're looking at the ROI, because for me, it's very fulfilling. You know, I'm an employee in corporate America, you know, and when I walk into corporate America, I don't see anybody that looks like me at the table, right? So, you know, the opportunity for me to sit on a corporate board is very slim, from what I see in my perspective and what I've experienced, right? So sitting on a non-for-profit board definitely gives us that opportunity that otherwise would not have, you know, and that's part of the reason that the auxiliary board that I sit on for Casa Central was created. You know, it's a lot of Latino professionals that felt challenged to be able to sit on a board. So that's one thing. The other one is, you know, look at the ROI. It's definitely an opportunity for you to upskill and maybe do things that you never really thought you'd see yourself doing. There's a lot of operations involved, you know, with some of the nonprofits, depending on the activities that you're focused on or that you're responsible for. But just in general, I think there is no more fulfilling thing than to just be able to be selfless.
Yeah, I would just add to that, make sure that you're picking, when you're looking at nonprofits to potentially join their board, that you're passionate about the mission. My focus has always been, like I said, in the consulting world, I picked education and school districts as my focus because I wanted to help change that system in the way I could in my field. And so the nonprofits I sit on are in that space. And it's different. It's not just something on my resume. I actually don't even have either one of them on my resume because that's not what I was here for. Like, I wanted to try to be a part of the change, be held accountable to a group of people. And so I think making sure that you're passionate about whatever board that you're joining and what the causes and missions are.
I would, one of the biggest gripes I've always had with board recruiting and just boards in general is that a lot of times I feel like boards are created, especially when like the staff think of it only as a fundraising opportunity. You end up with a bunch of non-specialists who have to do work that's really, really important to society that they are not qualified to do. It's not just operations, right? A board has a program committee. A board has ops committees. Board has a lot of different roles. And when you have, for instance, an organization that may have as its mission combating instances of homelessness in a place like Chicago, and you got somebody coming from the banking sector who's learning about homelessness in Chicago by taking on a leadership role about it, it slows the whole organization down. One of the things I always tell people, a board is not where you go to learn how to do important work. It's where you go to do important work. You learn that stuff at somebody else's expense, right? We need people who are tactical, who are strategic, who are committed, who are invested, and who are ready. Because most of the time boards operate on nonprofits that exist specifically to clean up the work, the mess that the for-profit community creates. And if that's the case, then you need folks who greatly understand what the purpose of that nonprofit is and how to move that work through society through the lens of operational management and strategic planning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my advice is always to say, yes, love the mission, be committed to the mission, these types of things. But the other side of it is make sure you actually are prepared to do the work of that place. Treat it just like a job. If you didn't go to school for JavaScript, don't sign up for an engineering role. Go take a class on Coursera and then consider a career shift right, into engineering. But don't expect that organization is going to be made more strong because you happen to be like wealthy and you're stepping into that work with high ambition and low skill. And now they're the ones who have to bear the brunt of the injuries you create or the pace that you slow down. This is real. Like, we need these nonprofits to do what they're doing. We need specialists. And so my advice is always go where you're a specialist and learn at someone else's expense before you take on that. That's just a high level of leadership to have no skill to do something else. It's just too high. The stakes are too high.
So just building on those great comments, I would add that any prospective board member meet with current board members and really treat it as an informational interview so you can find out exactly what those roles and responsibilities are and how your unique gifts or skills, can contribute to advancing this mission. You don't want to just come in not knowing, really how you might be able to uniquely contribute and, advance any particular project that we're having to work on right now. So yeah, definitely take the time to, not just learn about the organization broadly, but go deeper and really think about how your unique skills can contribute to making it a better place for everyone.
Any final thoughts on that question? All right, well, thank you all so much for this. There's so much to talk about, and I feel the desire to want to pick your brains around some of these things about how you structure the board and dive deeper, but we don't have time for that today. So I will pass it on to Priya.
Thanks, guys. You guys are so dope. I'm so glad all of you guys are my friends and you're doing the great work that you're doing on our nonprofit community. So I appreciate your insight. And so we're actually going to take this time to break into our breakout sessions right now, where everybody will have an opportunity to dive deeper in a lot of these conversations that we just heard and shared with the organizations that you guys showed interest in. So we're going to swap into small, intimate breakout rooms with a representative of each of these orgs. You'll have 15 minutes with 2 organizations to learn a little bit more about what they do, how they promote diversity, and what are the board opportunities in their organizations right now. And again, this is really about getting all of you guys engaged in this space in a very proactive way and be a fellow board member, just like these amazing board panelists that we just had. So it'll take a couple minutes just to switch everybody in, but after the 2 sessions, we'll come back all together and debrief and have some action items for us to all do moving forward. Hi, everyone. Are we all back? I hope you guys had some really good conversations. And sorry for any delays in swapping rooms. I know a lot of people had to fall off, but I hope you guys got some good combos during this time. And I appreciate you all joining us for this really critical conversation that will continue, and we will move forward with really touching on a lot of the points that we discussed today. So we wanted to have you guys still stay engaged with us, all the nonprofits that are here today, our panelists, and here's all their contact info. So please jot down anybody that you had a connection with during this time, and we'll also be sending out this contact information through a follow-up email. So you guys will definitely have this in your inbox, but if you want to send a quick email right now and connect right after, feel free to jot this down. And like I said, this is meant to be an ongoing discussion, and we will continue to further this, but I hope you got some inspiration on how you can be involved with the nonprofit community, potential board members, and awesome organizations that are doing critical work for you to explore. So I appreciate everybody, and we'll see you guys all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you.
Thanks, Priya. This was great. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Priya.
Of course. Thank you, guys.